I've got a little girl here with a tall gentleman, and she looks so much like that Shasta.
Okay. Are they still in the building?
And we're not sure. She looks so much like her, and I don't know.
All right, we'll have someone go that way.
In a small, quiet town in Idaho, a night of unspeakable horror unfolded that still sends shivers down the spine. For 8 years old Shasta Groene, everything she knew and loved was ripped away. Her home, a place that should have been her safest sanctuary, was turned into a crime scene. Shasta witnessed something no child should ever see: the brutal murders of her mother, stepfather, and brother right there in their family home. But the nightmare didn't end with the murders. Shasta and her brother Dylan were snatched from their lives by the murderer, Joseph Duncan III, a known criminal who had somehow dodged the full grip of the law. What followed were 7 weeks of captivity, an ordeal that chills the bone just to think about. But still, this 8-year-old girl outsmarted that murderer and tricked him to let her go outside. So how did an 8-year-old trick a mastermind criminal, and what exactly happened? Let's rewind back to the beginning. It all kicked off when this creepy guy noticed Shasta playing in the yard. He didn't just walk by. He started watching the Groene family, learning their daily patterns. Imagine that, someone plotting so carefully to do something so terrible. He believed he was setting up the perfect crime, but he had no idea what Shasta was capable of. Despite being only 8 years old, Shasta was about to show this guy that he picked the wrong kid to mess with. Her bravery was off the charts. While he thought he had everything figured out, Shasta was steps ahead, finding ways to gain control in a situation that was beyond what most of us could ever handle. Her quick thinking during those intense moments would eventually make sure this man could never terrorize anyone else. Before all this madness, Shasta's life was about as normal and happy as you can imagine. She lived out in Coeur d'Alene with her mom, Brenda, Brenda's boyfriend, Mark, and her brothers, Dylan and Slade. They weren't rolling in cash, but they were rich in all the ways that mattered, with love and laughter and lots of time spent together. Shasta and her brother Dylan were especially close. They were pretty much inseparable, always off on some outdoor adventure, whether it was fishing, camping, or just messing around outside. Dylan was a one-of-a-kind kid, kind-hearted, popular, a real friend to everyone. He looked out for the kids who usually got left out and was just as comfortable hanging with the cool crowd. He was Shasta's best friend and her rock. Then, everything turned upside down one morning. 6 a.m., May 16th, 2005 to be exact. Brenda came rushing into Shasta's room, panic written all over her face. She blurted out that there was a man in the house who didn't want them there. Scared and confused, Shasta followed her mom into the living room. That's when she saw him, a man with a shotgun. At first, in her sleepy haze, Shasta thought maybe he was a cop, but then he started barking orders, telling them to lie face down. When he whipped out zip ties and duct tape to bind their hands, the horrible truth dawned on Shasta. This was no cop. This was a nightmare unfolding right before her eyes. Next, their house is filled with loud bangs, then gut-wrenching screams and yelling. The man with the hammer, ruthless and cold, beats Mark, Brenda, and Slade one by one. It's beyond horrifying. He's attacking them with a hammer. But then he turns to Shasta and Dylan, the 2 youngest kids, and ties them. He has something different planned for them. Imagine the terror when he grabs Shasta, picks her up, and takes her outside. He lays her under a tree in the backyard, right next to her brother. They're just lying there, with no idea what's going to happen next, or why they've been separated from the rest of their family. Then, things get even worse. Their brother Slade, injured and barely able to move, stumbles out of the house, trying to escape. But the man isn't done. He chases after Slade and beats him even more. Slade ends up on the picnic table, first sitting up, then collapsing, lying down, barely alive. The man then shoves Shasta and Dylan into his car. As they drive away, the kids are in total horror, not knowing what's going to happen next, terrified about what might have happened to their family. The drive is long, almost 100 miles to a remote campground outside St. Regis, Montana, deep in the Lolo National Forest. When they got there, the man again terrified them. He grabs the hammer and shows it to them. See this hammer? This is the hammer that I murdered your mom and stepdad and your brother with. And if you don't do what I say, then I will end your life with this same hammer. So here's what went down after that horrifying event. A neighbor, just swinging by the Groene house for a quick hello, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But the moment he gets a glimpse of the scene through the windows, he knows something's terribly wrong. Without a second thought, he's on the phone to the cops. When the police get there, they're met with a scene that's straight out of a horror movie. They've seen some rough stuff in their time, but this was a whole new level of nightmare. They said later that nothing could have prepared them for what they found inside that house. Inside, they discover Brenda Groene, her boyfriend Mark McKenzie, and her 13-year-old son Slade, all brutally murdered. In a heartbreaking detail, they find Slade's body next to his mom's. Despite his injuries, he's managed to drag himself back inside, maybe to be close to his mom in his last moments. The two youngest kids, Dylan and Shasta, were nowhere to be found. The cops start scouring the property, clutching at any clue that might point them to where the kids could be. They also hit up all the family's friends and relatives, checking to see if, by some chance, the kids were with them. No luck. Now, you know how sometimes it turns out to be a family drama behind these things? The cops thought of that. They went to talk to Dylan and Shasta's dad, Steve. Turns out, he'd had a big argument with Brenda just days before over the kids' custody. And then he goes on the news, making this emotional plea that, well, it kind of raised a few eyebrows, made people a bit suspicious of
I'd
it.
like to address my children's abductors or abductor. Please release my children safely.
Meanwhile, the police are swamped with tips, hundreds of them, as they're frantically trying to find Shasta and Dylan. The whole community's on edge, scared stiff with two kids missing and a killer on the loose. They put out an Amber Alert, and everyone in Coeur d'Alene is doing what they can, hoping for a break in the case. The tips are flying in by the thousands, but none of them are adding up. The cops are pretty sure this wasn't some random break-in gone wrong. Nothing was stolen, no mess, just targeted violence. It felt personal, deliberate, and that just added another layer of chill to the whole horrific scenario. You start looking at this whole thing, and it just screams crime of passion, right? You can't help but wonder, who hated this family so much that they'd go this far? It's sickening. Now, Shasta and Dylan, these two kids who've just lost 3 family members in a matter of hours, they're all each other has left, and they're stuck in the middle of nowhere with a maniac who doesn't even let them mourn. Instead, he drags them to this remote campsite and a nearby cabin and starts this whole new nightmare of abuse. This guy, their abductor, he's losing it, throwing things around, unleashing all his anger. And Dylan, he's getting the worst of it. The man abuses him and forces Shasta to watch. And if Shasta cries, like any kid watching her brother being hurt would, he just goes harder on Dylan. It's brutal. Then one night, he cranks up his twisted games. He plants this seed of hope. He tells them, "Do what I say, and you can go home." He even makes them write letters to their family, hinting they might see them again. Imagine the hope that sparked in Shasta and Dylan, thinking maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could end. But those letters, they were never sent. Just another sick game, another layer of manipulation. This guy was playing with their minds, making them believe there was a chance they'd make it out alive or see their family again. And Dylan, after all that horror, you can see him, the hope draining out of him, starting to doubt they'd ever get out of this alive. Back home, the clock's ticking louder with every second those kids are missing. The chances of finding them alive are slipping away. The police are out there, combing through every tip, every lead, desperate to find something that could lead them to Shasta and Dylan. The community's on edge. Everyone's holding their breath, hoping for a break in the case that will bring those kids home safe. Days turned into a nightmare that would end for Shasta and Dylan. As time dragged on, Shasta began to see the grim reality. Their captor had no intention of ever letting them go. Despite the bleak outlook, she noticed her older brother losing hope, and she knew she had to stay strong for both of them. They became each other's anchor, trying to withstand the storm together. Yet, the abuse they endured was relentless. The man started forcing drugs and alcohol on them, and under the influence, he would spin horrifying tales of murders and rapes he committed against other children. Little did he know, 8-year-old Shasta absorbed every word, storing the gruesome details in her memory, details that would later help her lead to his downfall. As Shasta learned more about this man's dark past, she began to formulate a plan. She sensed that he felt some twisted connection to her, and she decided to use this to her advantage. She started engaging him, asking about his life and his family, even innocently questioning if she could meet them someday. It was all calculated. She needed to make him believe that she cared about him, that she wanted to be there. Surprisingly, her strategy seemed to be working, as his treatment of them softened lightly. But then, about a month into their captivity, a glimmer of hope appeared that soon turned into another horrifying chapter of their ordeal. The captor had whimsically told the kids if they could catch a squirrel, he would let them go home. Day after day, the squirrel eluded them at the campsite. But finally, Dylan caught it. For a moment, there was a surge of hope. Maybe this nightmare was finally over. They thought he was packing them up to go home. However, their hope was brutally crushed. In a shocking and heart-wrenching moment, the man shot Dylan twice, right in front of Shasta. The first shot startled her, but by the second, Shasta knew it wasn't an accident, no matter the man's claims of trying to spare Dylan from pain. Now, Shasta had to face the unthinkable. She watched another brother die, and then the man, crying, manipulated her into helping him move Dylan's body onto a tarp and burn it. 6 weeks had passed since the nightmare began, and things took another grim turn. After the murder of her brother, Shasta's captor decided it was time to move again. Initially, they were hidden in a remote spot up the mountain where no one could see or hear them. But now, he took her to a lower area on the mountain. Here, while chained up inside a tent, Shasta could see people passing by not far off. The proximity to potential rescuers made her desperate to escape, but the fear of her captor was overwhelming. He had made it clear that he would kill her if she so much as tried to catch someone's eye. So, terrified, she remained silent. One terrifying night, despite Shasta doing everything he demanded, her captor decided he couldn't keep her around any longer. He put a rope around her neck and began to pull. After weeks of enduring unimaginable loss and torture, Shasta felt herself nearing the end. But then, something sparked in her, a desperate idea to survive. The man had once shared his nickname with the kids, Jet. In a last-ditch effort to save herself, Shasta called him by that name, hoping to tap into any remaining shred of humanity he might have left. To her relief, it worked. Using Jet softened him momentarily. He paused, tears forming in his eyes, and in that vulnerable moment, he loosened his grip. "I can't do this," he muttered, overwhelmed by emotion. Shasta, seizing the opportunity, began to carefully craft a sense of connection, hoping it might be her ticket to survival. She noticed that whenever she mentioned things that meant something to him, he would react, almost caught off guard by her words. She was playing a dangerous game, but it was her only chance. As the weeks dragged on, Nearing July the 2nd, 7 weeks since she was kidnapped, Shasta's strategy began to bear fruit. Her captor, now seemingly seeing her as someone important to him, sat her down and asked if she would be his kid and call him Dad. He even talked about taking her to meet his mom, to which Shasta, playing her part, agreed. Seeing a glimmer of hope, Shasta started to weave a narrative that might lead to her rescue. She told him she wanted to show him where she grew up, her school, where her best friend lived, places that were meaningful to her. She told him these things because he was now important to her. It was a clever play, setting the stage for being seen in public, potentially catching the eye of someone who could finally bring her nightmare to an end. Nearly 2 months had rolled by since Shasta and her brother Dylan were snatched from their lives. Now, in a twist of fate, Shasta found herself back in Coeur d'Alene. Her captor, maybe getting careless, drove her right into town and even stopped at a local convenience store. Shasta's heart pounded with hope and fear as she silently prayed that someone, anyone, would recognize her and save her. The store manager eventually checked the security footage, but only after they had already left. So close, yet so far. Shasta clung to hope, though deep down she was bracing for more disappointment. Then the man casually asked if she was hungry. Realizing this could be her chance to be seen in public, she quickly said yes, hoping to be spotted by someone at the restaurant. They headed to the Denny's in Coeur d'Alene. Walking into the restaurant, Shasta's heart skipped a beat when she saw her missing persons poster right by the entrance. Just outside, a guy caught her eye. He seemed to recognize her. He nodded slightly, and she cautiously nodded back. He walked up to the counter, pretending to chat with one of the waitresses, but Shasta noticed the waitress sneak peeks at her. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The waitress, Amber Deanne, served them, feeling that something was off. She didn't know the man or what he was capable of, but she sensed danger. Amber couldn't let her suspicions show, so she discreetly spoke to her manager that Shasta Groene was in their restaurant with a stranger.
I said, I think we should probably call Coeur d'Alene PD. I'm pretty positive that's Shasta Groene. I'll take full responsibility. I'll pay for their meal if I'm wrong. We need to get somebody up here.
She urged her manager to call the police. Others in the restaurant began to notice the little girl too. The community's vigilance was finally paying off as the officers got the tip they had been waiting for. Shasta, seeing the recognition in people's eyes, was overwhelmed with mixed emotions. She knew her abductor was cunning. He's so smart, she thought. Even if they recognize me, maybe he'll just talk his way out of it. The tension in the diner was increasing moment by moment. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the police to arrive. But the man was getting antsy, ready to leave. Quick-thinking Amber pretended there was a problem with printing the check, buying some precious time. Meanwhile, other diners subtly positioned themselves near the door, ready to intervene if he tried to make a break for it. Then, the moment everyone had been holding their breath for arrived. The police came in and went straight to Shasta. They asked for her name. When she confirmed who she was, the officers didn't hesitate. They took the man into custody, and just like that, the nightmare was over. Shasta could finally breathe a sigh of relief, safe at last from the clutches of her captor. Shasta didn't waste a moment to tell the police that the man with her was the one responsible for her family's murders and her abduction. He was identified as 42-year-old Joseph Duncan, a high-risk sex offender. His criminal behavior began shockingly early. He was just 15 years old when he committed his first recorded sex crime. By 2004, he faced charges for molesting a boy in Minnesota and had become a fugitive after posting $15,000 for bail and fleeing. The police found that the car Duncan had been driving, which contained a shotgun and video recording equipment with footage of Dylan and Shasta during their captivity, was stolen. With Shasta safe, attention turned to locating her brother Dylan, who was still missing. Duncan, however, refused to provide any information, forcing the officers to rely on Shasta for details. Despite her young age, Shasta courageously recounted the past 7 weeks, revealing the horrors she and Dylan had endured. Astonishingly, an 8-year-old had to witness such brutality and then relive it in detail for the investigators. During Duncan's trial, the jury was shown the video footage he had recorded, which was profoundly disturbing and highlighted the extent of his cruelty. This footage played a crucial role in the courtroom, providing undeniable evidence of his brutality.
31 years of being involved in the criminal justice system, I have never met a more evil person than Joseph Duncan.
On October 16, 2006, Duncan pleaded guilty to 3 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Brenda, Mark, and Slade Groene. He received 3 life sentences. He later pleaded guilty to 10 federal charges related to the kidnapping and sexual assault of Shasta and Dylan and the murder of Dylan, for which he was sentenced to death. Joseph Duncan was sent to federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, where he remained till his death from brain cancer on March 28, 2021.